If you were raised by a parent whose feelings filled the whole room, let these words meet the part of you that learned to be careful very early. You may notice your body wanting to get ahead of someone else's reaction. You do not need to do that here. You do not need to keep the room calm for anyone while you listen. These affirmations are for the daughter who learned that her mother's distress mattered more than her own feelings. It makes sense that I learned to read emotional weather before I learned to read my own needs. It makes sense that I notice tone, facial expression, silence, and sudden shifts, because my body learned those things could mean danger. I am allowed to admit that being around her feelings was exhausting, even if other people only saw her pain and not my burden. I did not imagine the way the whole house reorganized itself around her moods. I was a child, and it was never my job to steady an adult who could not steady herself. When I felt responsible for keeping her calm, loved, reassured, or okay, that was not maturity. That was too much emotional weight for a child. It makes sense that I still feel guilty when I have needs, because my needs used to compete with someone else's emotional emergency. I am allowed to notice how often my feelings were interrupted, overshadowed, or turned into a problem for her. I am allowed to grieve the way I had to hide my inner world so hers could stay at the center. Her tears, panic, rage, or woundedness were real, and they still did not erase the impact they had on me. I do not have to keep excusing her pain while making mine smaller. My sensitivity was not the problem. The problem was being expected to carry emotions that were too big and too adult for me. It makes sense that I became good at soothing, explaining, rescuing, and reading what was needed before it was said. It makes sense that I now confuse love with taking care of other people's feelings, because that is what closeness meant in the home I came from. I am allowed to stop calling it closeness when I was never safe to be fully separate. I am allowed to remember how fast comfort could become control when her feelings were not handled the way she wanted. The part of me that still tightens when emotions get big is not dramatic. It is well trained. I do not have to keep proving that she meant well before I let myself tell the truth about what it cost me. My body deserves relationships where another person's feelings are shared with me, not dumped into me. I am learning that intimacy does not have to feel like walking into a storm without shelter. I am learning that someone else's distress can belong to them without becoming my immediate assignment. I can care about people without abandoning myself to prove that I care. I can pause before fixing, explaining, soothing, or overfunctioning, and that pause does not make me cruel. When I feel panic because someone is upset with me, I can remember that I am not trapped in childhood anymore. I do not need to shrink my reactions just because I was raised to believe hers were the only reactions that mattered. My emotions are not an inconvenience simply because they were inconvenient to her. I am allowed to become someone who listens inward before responding outward. I am allowed to protect my peace, even when another person wants to keep the drama going. I am allowed to disappoint the part of me that still thinks love means managing the room. Healing for me may feel quiet, unfamiliar, and almost suspicious at first, because chaos used to feel more emotionally recognizable than calm. I learned to check whether I was allowed to feel before I checked what I actually felt, and it makes sense that reconnecting with myself takes practice. My fear of conflict makes sense if childhood taught me that another person's upset could swallow the whole room. I may confuse emotional intensity with intimacy, and I am allowed to learn that real closeness has room for steadiness too. I can stop over-explaining myself to people who care more about feeling wronged than about understanding me. My panic around disappointing others does not mean I am doing something bad. It often means an old survival pattern has been activated. I can build boundaries that are kind, clear, and solid enough to protect the part of me that never got enough emotional shelter. I can trust that emotionally safe people do not need me to become smaller quicker or more soothing in order to stay connected to me. Love that requires me to betray my own feelings is not the kind of love my healing is moving toward. The child in me deserved a parent with steadiness, empathy, and room for her separate feelings. What happened to me had an impact, and naming that impact is part of coming back to myself. I am not too sensitive for being shaped by someone else's storms. I am not alone, and I do not have to disappear to be loved anymore.